One night in 1973, the two young McDaniel children of Enfield, Illinois, claimed to see a weird creature lurking in their yard and trying to get in the house. But Father Henry McDaniel chalked their creepy story up to the active imagination of childhood. However, he changed his mind later that night. After being awoken by strange scratching sounds, McDaniel grabbed a gun and a flashlight and peered outside his front door. There, between two rose bushes, he saw a creature that was almost like a human body, just as his kids had described. It had 3 legs on it, a short body, 2 little short arms, and 2 pink eyes as big as flashlights, he recounted to a reporter. McDaniel said he fired 4 shots and was sure he hit the creature at least once, causing it to make a hiss, much like a wildcat's before it ran off toward a railway embankment. McDaniel was stunned when he saw the monstrous beast jump 80 feet in 3 jumps before quickly running out of sight. The police found scratches on the door screen as well as footprints in the dirt near McDaniel's home that looked dog-like with 6 toe pads, yet no clues pointed to an unusual creature. McDaniel's sighting made the Reading Eagle, but it was clear most people didn't believe it was true. It didn't help that a 10-year-old neighbor faked his own eyewitness account of the beast, only to later admit that his testimony was a prank against the McDaniels. McDaniel reported 2 more sightings of the alleged beast to local cops, but he said they eventually threatened him with jail time because nobody believed what he saw had been real. But McDaniel was adamant and stood behind his scary true story. "If they do find it," McDaniel said in an interview, "they will find more than one and they won't be from this planet, I can tell you that." After McDaniel's public testimony about the Enfield Monster, other eyewitness claims began to surface. Monster hunters swarmed the town and at least 5 men were arrested after firing shots in the area and claiming to have photographed the creature. To this day, no explanation has been uncovered for this small-town creepy story. The term "saved by the bell" is an idiom commonly used to describe people who escaped difficult situations thanks to a last-minute solution. But the lighthearted phrase actually may have a true scary story behind it, related to a medical condition known as catalepsy. Catalepsy is a medical condition in which a patient endures an uncontrolled state of muscle rigidity and unresponsiveness. The condition is often linked to episodes of catatonia. Although the disease is widely understood now, in the past, it caused sufferers to be mistakenly buried alive. After newspapers reported on these tragic endings, writers like Edgar Allan Poe built similar incidents in his own creepy stories. The frequency of catalepsy patients being mistaken for dead people led to a string of quick-fix solutions by doctors and gravekeepers, though many of these ideas created new horrors of their own. One well-intentioned yet morbid solution was the creation of waiting mortuaries. In these hospitals for the dead, the bodies of suddenly catatonic patients were kept under observation for a few days to make sure they were actually dead. Waiting mortuaries were well stocked with food, wine, and cigars in the event that a patient woke up. Another more gruesome solution to avoid burying those who were still alive was to perform examinations to test the deadness of the patient. People thought to be dead had their fingers hacked off or endured smoke being literally blown up their butt. The assumption was that if the person didn't wake up, then that meant they were unequivocally dead. Otherwise, the procedure was used to revive those who were on the edge of death via tobacco's supposed restorative properties. There was only one problem with such test. Catalepsy prevents patients from feeling pain during their catatonic state, so employing extreme measures proved to be an ineffective method of confirming whether a person was dead or alive. True scary stories of being buried alive also spawned the creation of safety coffins. In 18th and 19th century Europe, especially Victorian England, enough people were being mistakenly buried alive that coffin makers came up with a number of solutions. These caskets were designed with above-ground horns or bells that a person who found themselves mistakenly buried alive could ring from the inside when they woke up trapped underground. Some of these safety coffins also came equipped with a stash of poison in case the person figured out they wouldn't be saved. Other models used glass panes that would fog up if the person was still breathing. Some had tubes that gravekeepers would have to sniff each day to confirm that the body inside was actually decomposing. Other people were simply buried with the keys to their own coffin in their pocket. But the bell models were among the most pervasive. These morbid contraptions were allegedly where the phrase, "saved by the bell," came from, according to some. It's unclear whether safety coffins did any good to reduce the number of people who were accidentally buried alive. But the thought of being trapped with no escape for eternity is enough to send a chill down your spine. At the height of the Cold War, when radio was still a top medium for disseminating news and information, many listeners accidentally stumbled into some rather unnerving programming. These creepy broadcasts would typically begin with a strange melody or several beeps, and were followed by the voice of a woman or child reciting seemingly random numbers. These transmissions played routinely and lasted for several minutes on frequencies that listeners dubbed numbers stations. The discovery of these strange numbers stations quickly gained attention among those who were unfortunate to find themselves listening to these mysterious broadcasts. The phenomenon also spawned a fringe group of radio listeners dedicated to solving the mystery of who was sending these broadcasts and why. Each number station they discovered was given a name depending on the nature of its broadcast. Among the most well-known were the Nancy Adams Susan, the Gong Station, and the Lincolnshire Poacher. They were all uniquely bizarre in their own way, spurring a number of creepy stories about who could possibly be behind them. It wasn't until the 1980s that amateur sleuths tracking these number stations hypothesized that the mysterious broadcasts were actually coded messages used in espionage operations across the globe. The idea has been supported by figures like Rupert Allison, an author who specializes in espionage and writes under the pen name Nigel West. Nobody has found a more convenient and expedient way of communicating with an agent, Allison said. Their sole purpose is for intelligence agencies to communicate with their agents in denied areas, a territory where it is difficult to use a consensual form of communications. Remarkably, these shortwaves of alleged coded messages can still be found on the radio today, so long as one is diligent enough to search for them. Espionage tactics may seem like the most plausible explanation for these ghostly signals, but the true intent of some of these numbers stations have never been cracked. One station known as the Buzzer has been sending out mysterious broadcasts since the Cold War. It features two buzzies at the top of every hour, followed by a monotonous drone between every 21st and 34th minute during daylight hours. A voice follows, reading a string of numbers, words, or names in Russian like Anna, Nikolai, Ivan, Tatiana, Roman. It was initially believed that the broadcast was set up by Soviet authorities, but after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the strange radio broadcast only became more active. To this day, nobody knows who started it, what it's about, or why it continues. The true scary story of the number stations goes on. Thrill seekers traveling to Colombia will likely be attracted to the true scary stories surrounding the Hotel del Salto, a former hotel turned museum purported to be one of the most haunted places in the country. Hotel del Salto, which translates literally to Hotel of the Leap, has allegedly been haunted since it was first constructed as a mansion in 1923. It was designed by architect Carlos Arturo Tapias, who was inspired by the French architectural aesthetic that was popular during the time. Its location overlooking the famous Tequendama Falls gave the mansion breathtaking views. But according to some creepy stories, the falls may also be the source of its alleged hauntings. The mansion was the scene of many lavish parties, and by 1928 was turned into a popular hotel. But then, the horrific tragedies began. Hotel patrons inexplicably leaped to their deaths out of their windows. At least one homicide took place there, when a guest brutally murdered a young socialite in one of the rooms, splattering the walls with her blood. Meanwhile, guests of the notorious Hotel del Salto claimed to witness spooky apparitions that appeared around the hotel at night, including the ghost of the murdered socialite. In local legends, Tequendama Falls is said to have been where many people of the indigenous Muisca tribe escaped from Spanish colonizers by leaping off the nearby cliff centuries before. Though the native legend says the Muisca were incarnated into flying eagles as they jumped off the cliff, thus surviving the brutal plunge, locals believe the land has since been cursed by the Muisca, some of whom may have not survived their attempts to escape the Spanish invaders. Even after it was shuttered in the 1990s, scary stories about the hotel continued to emerge. Some claim that loud screams can still be heard coming from the abandoned hotel. Additionally, they say that the constant mudslides on the road to reach the property and the stench from the heavily polluted river water further prove paranormal activity on the grounds. Today, the once rundown hotel has been converted into a sleek and stylish cultural museum. Curious visitors can tour the former hotel, but only during business hours, which end at 5 p.m., well before scary stories say the ghosts appear. If there's anything more effective than physical weapons to defeat enemy soldiers in a war, it's psychological terror. That's just what US troops employed during their invasion in the Vietnam War. In Vietnamese culture, giving a proper burial to a loved one in their birthplace ensures their contentment in the afterlife. If not, it is believed the deceased's soul will wander aimlessly as it tries to find its way home. US forces in the Vietnam War were aware of this belief and took advantage of it to cause terror. Knowing that the Vietnamese people were worried, many of their soldiers would die far from home and unable to be properly buried. US forces employed a freaky psychological scare tactic known as Operation Wandering Soul. The 6th Psychological Operations Battalion, 6th PASIOP, of the US Army, broadcasted disturbing moans of disembodied voices throughout the Vietnam jungle where the battles took place. These fake tapes were played on a series of loudspeakers or dispatched from overhead planes. For many Vietnamese soldiers, hearing the cries of supposedly lost souls piercing through the dark was nothing short of terrifying. The scare tactic was inspired by the Ghost Army of World War II, a unit of inflatable tanks and personnel carriers used to fool German intelligence forces into thinking the Allies had more troops and tanks than they actually did. These hair-raising messages that played in the Vietnam battlefield successfully convinced many nervous Vietnamese soldiers that their fallen comrades were skulking invisibly among them. Many of the fake ghost messages recorded were created with the help of South Vietnamese allies and voiced pleas to the soldiers to give up the fight. "My friends, I have come back to let you know that I am dead. I am dead. Don't end up like me, go home friends, before it's too late." The tapes were convincing enough to send hundreds of men fleeing from the mountains. Of course, not all Vietnamese soldiers fell for this spooky psychological operation. But even in the midst of a war, it still struck a chord. The soldiers who remained fired in the direction of the eerie voices, reminding them of the very real possibility of death that awaited them if defeated. Of all the true scary stories about life inside America's jails, the Tucker telephone is surely the most awful. And for inmates doing time at the Tucker State Prison Farm in Arkansas in the early 1960s, there was nothing more terrifying than the Tucker telephone. The Tucker telephone was a sadistic method of punishment frequently used on prisoners at the state prison, which is now the Tucker unit of the Arkansas Department of Correction. The torture device was the brainchild of prison physician Dr. A. E. Rollins and prison superintendent Jim Bruton. On its face, the device looks like an old crank telephone, but with the addition of an electric generator and 2 dry cell batteries, it became one of the most notorious torture machines in the history of U.S. incarceration. Hooked up to a source of immense electric power, the Tucker telephone functioned as an electric shock device attached to the private parts of victims. Inmates sent to the hospital room were strapped down to a table with 2 wires applied to their skin. The ground wire was wrapped around their big toe, while the hot wire, which the electricity ran through, was strapped to the inmates' private parts. Once the doctors turned the crank on the Tucker telephone, their victims were brutally shocked by torrents of electricity. Sometimes these torture sessions dragged on for long periods, known as long-distance calls. The sheer barbarism of this punishment method was described in Tom Merton's shocking 1970 book, Accomplices to the Crime: The Arkansas Prison Scandal. In long-distance calls, several charges were inflicted, of a duration designed to stop just short of the inmates fainting. Sometimes the telephone operator's skill was so defective, and the sustained current not only caused the inmate to lose consciousness, but resulted in irreparable damage to his testicles. Tragically, many of the prisoners not only ended up with permanent organ damage, but also suffered from mental illness following the torture. But the Tucker telephone wasn't an isolated incident. A Newsweek report from 1967 revealed that prisoners were routinely beaten with paddles, had needles stuck under their fingernails, tortured with pliers, and punished using an electric chair. The brutality of the prison became so famous that the Tucker telephone eventually found itself depicted in the 1980 film Brew Baker. Unfortunately, even after the torture device was no longer deployed against inmates, the Tucker telephone was repurposed by the Chicago Violent Crime Unit under Lieutenant John Burge to torture suspects in the 1980s. American interrogators abroad have also reportedly used the device to torture their captives. In 18th century Gévaudan, an idyllic country territory in France, a horrific series of slayings and scary stories about a killer had residents up in arms. But the perpetrator was believed to be not a man, but a beastly monster that resembled a wolf. The first victim was Jean Boulet, a 14-year-old shepherdess who was mysteriously found dead in 1764 with her throat ripped out. Then, another teen victim was discovered a month later. The second victim allegedly described their killer as a horrible beast before taking their last breath. Hundreds more were mauled with their throats or chests ripped out. Creepy stories from those who claimed to have survived or witnessed the attacks described an enormous wolf-like animal with black fur, a large chest, and a mouth full of sharp teeth. These witness accounts peppered the newspapers, which quickly dubbed the murderous creature as the Beast of Gévaudan. Locals organized hunting parties in the wake of the brutal killings. Jean-Baptiste Duhamel, an infantry leader of the local militia, organized 30,000 volunteers to hunt down and kill the beast with the promise of a year's salary as the reward. Still, the hunting campaigns were unsuccessful, and the body count continued to grow. According to the scary stories that spread across the countryside, a farmer named Jean Chastel, who lost many loved ones to the Beast of Gévaudan, decided to take matters into his own hands. He allegedly wandered into the mountains armed with nothing but a pistol and some silver bullets. After taking a rest to read the Bible in the hopes of luring in the creature, the alleged beast appeared in front of him. Somehow Chastel managed to shoot and kill the beast, triumphantly presenting it later to the king. Some claim that a cornucopia of human remains tumbled out of the wolf's stomach when it was cut open. These creepy stories famously inspired Robert Louis Stevenson's 1879 book, Travels with a Donkey in the Cevennes, and pop culture adaptations like Christophe Gan's 2002 horror film, Brotherhood of the Wolf. But was there really a supernatural wolf terrorizing France? Historians have yet to agree on what exactly happened at Gévaudan. Some say it was simply mass hysteria, and the murderous pack of wolves or lions that likely caused the killings were exaggerated into a monster. Nevertheless, one thing remains clear. An estimated 300 people were brutally killed during that tragic period. Perhaps the true scary story is that nobody will ever know what may have caused those very real deaths. Some superstitions hold that certain numbers are bad luck. One cell phone number issued by a Bulgarian mobile phone company in particular actually seems to be connected to the deaths of at least 3 people, all of whom had used the same number before their ominous deaths. Whether a coincidence or not, the unlucky cell phone number 088888888 has since become synonymous with deadly bad luck. The first victim, in fact, was the former CEO of the mobile phone company Mobiltel, named Vladimir Grashnov. He died of cancer at the age of 48 in 2001, shortly after receiving the number from his former company. Rumors suggest the real cause of Grashnov's death was that he was being slowly poisoned by a competitor. 2 years later, the alleged curse hit the next victim of the unlucky mobile number. Konstantin Dimitrov, a Bulgarian mafia boss gunned down while having dinner with his model girlfriend, was killed at the age of 31. Investigators suspect it was a hit job by a rival drug boss. The third and final victim to hold the ill-fated number was Konstantin Dishliev, who was shot to death while sitting down at an Indian restaurant in 2005. Dishliev, like the previous owner of the mobile phone number, was engaged with the underground criminal world. He was known as a crooked businessman who operated a secret drug trafficking operation. It might strike an observer of this true scary story that these high-profile victims would likely have died with or without the number, particularly those who were entangled in drug trafficking. But the fact that all 3 men died within a 5-year period was enough for the mobile phone company to pull the number out of circulation. Yet the creepy stories of the deadly number live on to this day. Today, Berkshire County, Massachusetts, is famous for its wide-open countryside that makes it a popular vacation destination. But the rural territory was once heralded as a hotbed of UFO activity, following the alleged sighting that took place on the evening of September 1st, 1969. More than 50 years later, the true scary story of the Berkshire UFO Incident remains perhaps the most chilling tale of an alien abduction on record. According to witnesses' creepy stories, a disc-shaped craft was seen performing acrobatic maneuvers in the sky above the Berkshires that night. Others say they didn't just see the craft, but were taken aboard it. It's unclear exactly how long the phenomenon lasted, but many who claim to have witnessed the Berkshire UFO describe losing time, unable to account for an hour or so during the incident. "Everything got really calm," said Thomas Reed, one of the most well-known witnesses of the 1969 Berkshire UFO phenomenon. "It was like being in the middle of a hurricane. There was like a barometric change in pressure. It was just like a dead silence. Then there was an eruption of crickets and frogs, and it got really loud, and that was it." It was estimated that at least 40 residents, including children who are now adults still living in the Berkshire area, saw the alleged alien aircraft. Some of them reportedly called into the local radio station to share the bizarre phenomenon that they had just seen. "We had listeners call the radio station that evening," said David Easy, general manager of local radio station WSBS. "At the time, they didn't know it was a UFO. They just, called the station to say something bizarre has happened." The large number of simultaneous witness accounts during the UFO Berkshire incident has made it a distinct case among alleged sightings in recent decades. The witness accounts were so plentiful and compelling that the Great Barrington Historical Society decided to officially recognize the incident as the first off-world UFO case in U.S. history, some 45 years after it happened. Following the stunning recognition, witnesses formed the non-profit UFO Monument Park to build a monument in the area. The monument, meant as a landmark to honor the alleged UFO encounter that residents saw in 1969, was erected by the group and signed by Massachusetts Governor Charlie Baker. Despite the significant eyewitness accounts of the event, some residents of the town have fought to keep scary stories of the alleged UFO incident under wraps. The monument was removed following contentious arguments between the group of witnesses that built the structure and local officials in 2019. Still, The eerie aftermath of the unexplained encounter stays with residents who bore witness that fateful night and who continue to share the creepy story to this day.